Today, what I want to talk about is something that I thought I'd heard on another podcast, but I'd misheard slightly. It was pretty much a fairly well known tennis podcast where one of the guys on it was talking about how statistics can't always tell you which player is the best just because they've got good statistical ratings when it comes to their return or their serve. You can't definitively predict that they're going to be a top five player. He was talking about Tommy Paul, and in the midst of it, he mentioned Djokovic. And then when he said the words, he's not a top five player, I could name 12 or 13 players that have better ground strokes than him. I almost lost my mind because I thought he was still talking about Djokovic, but he was actually still talking about Tommy Paul. So it was a bit weird. I had to do a double or triple take with that. But anyways, it did get me thinking about who are the players with the best ground strokes, or the who would be the top 10 when it comes to ground strokes, which I will get to in a second. But I do want to mention two things from my predictions from the previous video first. First, I'll mention the bad. Um, Obviously, I've got a few tips wrong so far, as we all do. I did tip that Alcaraz would be way too good for Jordan Thompson in every regard, and given that Alcaraz sneaked through in a match that went over 3 hours, I didn't exactly hit the nail on the head with that one. So it's a little bit surprising. He's still a little bit off. I wonder if he'll come the US Open. I guess you've got a few easier matches first up as a seed. However, Jordan Thompson could still potentially be a first round opponent for a seed. So I don't think he's the hardest challenge out there. So for Alcaraz to struggle this much is surprising. We'll have to see what happens. He will have to improve a fair bit to have any real chance of defending his title. Although in saying this, I did also think that Nadal would have no chance at the Australian Open, the year that he won it most recently, even though in the match with Manarino, he really, really, really struggled to win the first set. I thought there was no chance he would even beat his next opponent, but he beat all opponents, including Medvedev when he was 2 sets down. But anyway, so that was the sort of bad tip of sorts. Although I do have a few more, I'll go into that in more detail another time. But the good tip that I made, I did tip Rusevori to beat Rublev, and it was probably a little bit of luck because when I looked up his record afterwards against top 10 players or top 20 players, even on hard courts, it's not real good. He did push Alcaraz quite far on clay earlier this year, pushed him to three and gave him a hard match. So he can play really good against some of the best players. I think the main reason, though, that I picked Rusevori to win was not just because he had beaten Team convincingly when he was ranked outside the world 150, I believe in 2019 Davis Cup, I'd looked it up, but it was also due to the fact that he's got a real big power game. And if you're up against people that all they do is hit it hard, like somebody like Rublev, who you could say he's just about the best player that all he does is hit it hard. Um, you know, a fellow hard hitter has always got a real good shot against somebody like that, as opposed to somebody who mixes up the game a lot more and is able to get at the different sorts of weaknesses that a player has. Like there's a reason that Rusevori has never been ranked in the top 30 or 40, and that reason is because he's got other weaknesses in his game. It's not got to do with a lack of power hitting. That's where he excels. That's where he was able to blow Dominic Thiem off the court when he was a top five player still. But yeah, it was an interesting one. It was very speculative, but managed to land. But anyways, now back to this top 10 ground strokes thing. So I think it's pretty safe to say that the only way you could be a top 10 or 15 player without having really good ground strokes is if you're, as a friend of mine called it, a serve bot. And I think it's fair to say we don't really have any serve bots on this screen. Hachanov's got real good serve, but I still wouldn't say he's a serve bot. It's not like he can't do anything else. But just going through the ones that I would say are top 10, and by the way, the colours are nothing to do with me. That's just players that are still in Cincinnati tournament playing at the moment. So Alcaraz and Djokovic this is in no real order, But Alcaraz and Djokovic are definitely top 10 players when it comes to their ground strokes. I would say Djokovic is the best. Not exactly the best offensively, but just the best all round. I feel like he's as dependable as any player ever has been from the back of the court, off either wing. Alcaraz obviously right up there, Medvedev right up there. Rune, Ruud, and Sinner are all very, very solid players as well. And I'd chuck Rublev and Tsitsipas there. So we've got our top eight. It's probably been pretty boring listening when it comes to that thus far. For Fritz, I feel it's his serve that helps him stay with the very best players. I don't see him as a perennial top 10 player. It's really shocked me he's got up to world number 5. I don't think he'll ever get there again. I think there's more talented players around. He is still only 25 though, so he could prove me wrong. And the same for Tiafoe. I just don't think he's of the same caliber as a lot of these other players. Again, I'm quite surprised he's made top 10. But, there's been bigger surprises out there for sure. Khachanov, again, I feel the serve helps him a lot. De Minaur, obviously, his movement is extremely good, and he is lacking in power off either wing. So, for dependability, he'd be right up there. As same for fitness and for speed, but not for just pure ground strokes. Tommy Paul, I agree with the podcaster. Probably would think that there'd be about 12 or 13 better than him. Probably not much more. He's a pretty solid player. Felix, definitely not. Way too inconsistent. Zverev, I would say, is, yes, the 9th best when it comes to the ground strokes. And then maybe, this one will be very speculative. I'd actually say probably Murray is really great on either wing. I do think, obviously, with the metal hip, that inhibits the movement. So, by that same logic, I would exclude Wawrinka from the list if he, go back 5 years, and he'd definitely be on the list. So, I'm not exactly sure who should be number 9. I definitely feel like it shouldn't really be somebody too far out of the top 10. So probably Musetti, maybe a little bit too inconsistent. I'm not sure. It's a bit of a tough one. It's a bit of a tough one to say exactly who it would be that I'd end up putting there as the 10th best. So definitely that top 7 and Tsitsipas 8, Zverev 9. It's a bit of a coin flip to see who else you would end up chucking in there. If you're going to exclude Murray because of movement, it's quite possible that you could end up saying somebody like Dimitrov. He's got very good strokes. He's just, I think mentally collapses a little bit at times, or the decision making maybe not the best. But when it actually comes to ground strokes, I think he's very good. Hurkacz, I'd say the same, but I feel like it's his serve that preps him up a little bit more than the others. So yeah, it's a bit of an interesting thought. Do you agree with my top 10, or who would you have as your 10th person? Have it in the comments below. I'd be interested to see which players people think probably do have top 10 rated ground strokes. Anyways, I'll leave you to it. We'll see how the rest of my predictions in Cincinnati go.